In the beginning, there was only land and sky. For 10,000 years, maybe more, human feet traced paths across a continent so vast it seemed infinite. They followed the rivers. They chased the seasons. They learned the language of every mountain, every valley, every star. These were the first Americans. Not by conquest, but by time itself. Their ancestors crossed frozen bridges between worlds when mammoths still walked the earth. They built civilizations that rose and fell before Rome was even a dream in 7 hills. But this is not a story about beginnings. This is a story about endings. Because in the winter of 1838, something happened that would stain the soul of a young nation forever. 15,000 human beings were forced to walk 1,000 miles through ice and death. 1 in 4 would never arrive. They called it Nunadal Tsuni, the trail where they cried. We call it the Trail of Tears. But to understand how a democracy could commit such an act, we must first understand the world that made it possible. In 1828, something extraordinary happened in New Echota, Georgia. The rhythmic clacking of a printing press echoed through the hills. But this was no ordinary newspaper. The Cherokee Phoenix became the first Native American newspaper in history, its pages flowing in 2 languages, English and Cherokee syllabary. Think about that for a moment. While Andrew Jackson was campaigning for president on a platform of Indian removal, the Cherokee were publishing newspapers. They had a written constitution, a Supreme Court, public schools. They had become everything the young American Republic claimed to admire, and that perhaps was their greatest mistake. But let's pull back, way back. To understand 1838, we need to understand 1492. When Columbus stumbled onto a continent he thought was India, he didn't just discover new land. He discovered a problem that would haunt European philosophy for centuries. If all humans descended from Adam and Eve, who were these people? The Spanish debated it in Valladolid. The Pope issued bulls about it. Philosophers twisted themselves into intellectual knots, trying to explain how there could be humans who weren't quite human. Because here's the thing about taking someone's land. First, you have to convince yourself they don't really own it. Meanwhile, across the ocean from these theological debates, the Cherokee were adapting with stunning speed. By 1800, many Cherokee lived in log cabins, not traditional dwellings. They raised cattle, grew cotton, operated mills. Some even owned plantations. And yes, horrifically, some owned enslaved Africans, adopting the very worst of European customs along with the rest. A Cherokee named Sequoyah did something no single person had ever done before or since. He created an entire writing system from scratch. Within months, Cherokee literacy rates surpassed those of their white neighbors. But in the state of Georgia, gold had been discovered on Cherokee land, and gold has a way of making constitutions disappear. To understand the Trail of Tears, you must understand one man, Andrew Jackson. Picture him, tall, gaunt, with a shock of white hair and eyes that had seen too much killing. By age 14, he was an orphan. By 45, he was a war hero. The Creek called him Sharp Knife. His own soldiers called him Old Hickory. But here's what the history books sometimes forget to mention. Jackson had been adopting Native American children for years. After massacring their parents at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, he took a Creek infant named Lincoln into his own home. He wrote tender letters about the boy. He paid for his education. He also never let him eat at the family table. This is the paradox of American racism. It can love individuals while destroying peoples. Jackson could bounce Lincoln on his knee and still sign the Indian Removal Act without his hand trembling, because in Jackson's mind, he was saving them. They are surrounded by the whites, Jackson argued, and their game is gone. They must disappear. Notice the passive voice. Must disappear, as if it were a law of nature, like gravity or entropy. As if 15,000 human beings would simply evaporate rather than be forced at gunpoint from their homes. But across the Atlantic, something else was happening that would seal the Cherokee's fate. In Manchester, England, new machines were spinning cotton into gold. The textile mills couldn't get enough of the white fiber that grew so perfectly in the American South. Between 1790 and 1860, cotton exports grew from 138,000 pounds to 1.8 billion pounds. But cotton is a hungry crop. It devours soil, depletes nutrients, demands fresh land every few years. And the Cherokee happened to be sitting on some of the finest cotton land in the world. Do you see how it works? A machine is invented in England. A plant is grown in Georgia. and a civilization that had existed for millennia must suddenly disappear. But the Cherokee wouldn't go quietly into that dark night. In 1832, something unprecedented happened. The Cherokee Nation took the state of Georgia to the Supreme Court and won. Chief Justice John Marshall in Worcester versus Georgia declared that Georgia had no right to impose its laws on Cherokee territory. The Cherokee Nation was sovereign. The federal government had a duty to protect them. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like law might triumph over greed. Andrew Jackson's response? John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. But if you can't win legally, you can always find someone willing to sell what isn't theirs to sell. In December 1835, a small group of Cherokee, maybe 500 out of 17,000, signed a treaty selling all Cherokee land east of the Mississippi for $5 million. The leaders who signed it, the Ridge family and Elias Boudinot, believed resistance was futile. Better to negotiate than be destroyed. The rest of the Cherokee Nation was horrified. John Ross, the principal chief, gathered 15,665 signatures, nearly the entire nation, opposing the treaty. It didn't matter. The Senate ratified it by a single vote. And here's where the story takes a turn that echoes through history. Those who signed the Treaty of New Echota. The Cherokee Nation had a law about selling tribal land without authorization. The penalty was death. For 2 years after the treaty, most Cherokee simply refused to leave. They tended their farms, published their newspaper, sent their children to school. They had to believe, that America would honor its own laws. In May 1838, 7,000 federal troops and state militia began arriving in Cherokee territory. General Winfield Scott, who would later become the longest-serving general in American history, was in command. His orders were simple: remove every Cherokee to the Indian Territory. Use whatever force necessary. It began at dawn on May 26, 1838. Imagine, you're eating breakfast with your family. Your children are laughing. Sunlight streams through the windows of the home your grandfather built. Then you hear the drums. Soldiers surround your house. They give you 5 minutes, maybe 10 if the sergeant is feeling generous, to gather what you can carry. Your grandmother's pottery? Leave it. The family Bible? Maybe, if you're quick, the deed to your land? Worthless paper now. As you're marched away at bayonet point, you turn to see neighbors, white neighbors, some you thought were friends, already looting your home. By nightfall, they'll be sleeping in your bed. The Army had built 31 stockades across Cherokee territory, rough wooden forts that were essentially concentration camps. Families were separated. Disease spread like wildfire. Food was scarce and often rotten. A missionary named Daniel Butrick wrote, "The poor captive, in a state of distressing agitation, his weeping wife almost frantic with terror, surrounded by a group of crying, terrified children, without a friend to speak a consoling word. But here's what breaks the heart. Many Cherokee dressed in their finest clothes for the removal. They wanted to show the soldiers, the watching world, that they were not savages. They were a civilized people being treated like animals. And still, some resisted. In the mountains of North Carolina, a Cherokee named Solly and his family fled into the wilderness. When soldiers tried to capture them, Solly fought back. The Army's message was clear: surrender Solly, or we'll hunt down every Cherokee in these mountains. So Solly walked out of the forest and into legend. He was executed by firing squad, by other Cherokee forced to pull the triggers. His sacrifice saved hundreds who still live in those mountains today. But for 15,000 others, the walking was about to begin. In June 1838, the first groups were loaded onto boats, floating prisons heading west on the Tennessee, Ohio, Mississippi, and Arkansas rivers. The summer heat was suffocating. Water barrels went rancid. Children died of dysentery before they'd even left Tennessee. One boat captain reported throwing 80 dead overboard on a single trip. But the Cherokee leaders pleaded for delay. "Let us organize our own removal," they asked. "We know our people. We can do this better." Astonishingly, the government agreed. Perhaps because self-removal was cheaper than military escort. On October 1, 1838, the first overland group set out. Think about that date. October with winter coming on. Whether by incompetence or design, they would walk straight into the coldest winter in memory. 13 groups, each about 1,000 people. The very old and very young rode in wagons when there were wagons to ride in. Everyone else walked, 20 miles on a good day, 10 on a bad one, through Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, and finally into Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. The Mississippi River was frozen when they reached it. They waited for days for it to thaw enough to cross. Food ran out. Government contractors, paid per head delivered, had every incentive to provide as little as possible. An eyewitness, John Burnett, wrote decades later, "Murder is murder, and somebody must answer. Somebody must explain the streams of blood that flowed in the Indian country in 1838. Somebody must explain the 4,000 silent graves that mark the trail of the Cherokees to their exile. Let me tell you about Quoddy Ross. She was the wife of Principal Chief John Ross, the leader who had fought removal every step of the way. When a child was dying of cold, Quoddy gave up her only blanket. She died of pneumonia near Little Rock, Arkansas. The chief who had tried to save his nation couldn't even save his wife." Or consider the story recorded by Private John Burnett. "One evening during a rainstorm, a frail woman carrying a baby in her arms sank by the roadside. I lifted the woman and child into a wagon. When morning came, the woman was dead, and a small grave was dug by the roadside for her. The child was somehow kept alive. 4,000 graves.
Maybe more.
1 in 4 who started the journey never finished it. Elders who remembered fighting alongside Americans in the War of 1812. Children who would never see 5 winters. Mothers who watched their babies die and had to keep walking. But here's what the history books don't always tell you. They also carried their sacred fire. Through 1,000 miles of death, they kept the eternal flame of the Cherokee burning. Guards tried to extinguish it. Winter rains tried to drown it. It never went out. It burned still. In March 1839, the last group stumbled into Indian territory. They found a land nothing like the mountains they'd left. Different plants, different animals, different spirits in the earth, and they found other tribes. Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, who'd been forced there before them. The 5 civilized tribes, the Americans called them. Civilized because they'd tried to adapt. Removed because they'd adapted too well. Remember the Treaty of New Echota? The one signed by a handful of Cherokee that sold away a nation? On June 22, 1839, the blood law was enforced. Major Ridge, his son John Ridge, and Elias Boudinot were executed by Cherokee loyal to John Ross. They knew it was coming. Major Ridge had said when he signed the treaty, "I have signed my death warrant." But here's the tragedy within the tragedy. Both sides thought they were saving the Cherokee people. The Ridge family believed accommodation would ensure survival. Ross believed resistance would preserve sovereignty. Both were right. Both were wrong. The Cherokee Nation split into factions that wouldn't fully heal for generations. What happened to the architects of removal? Andrew Jackson died in 1845, still convinced he'd been the Indians' best friend. On his deathbed, his last words were about meeting his family in heaven. One wonders if Lincoln was waiting for him there. General Winfield Scott went on to become the hero of the Mexican-American War. He ran for president in 1852 and lost. History remembers him as Old Fuss and Feathers, not as the man who organized the Trail of Tears. The state of Georgia got its Cherokee land. Within a generation, that soil was exhausted by cotton. Many of the farms were abandoned by the Civil War. The Cherokee? They survived. They built schools and churches and governments in Oklahoma. They created businesses and universities. Today, the Cherokee Nation is the largest tribal government in the United States with more than 400,000 citizens. But survival isn't the same as justice. Here's what should terrify you about the Trail of Tears. It wasn't unique. The same story played out with variations across the continent. The Navajo Long Walk, the Potawatomi Trail of Death, the Dakota Exile after 1862. But zoom out further. Armenia, 1915, Germany, 1938, Cambodia, Sidin Sefin, Rwanda, 1923, Bosnia, 1995. The pattern is always the same. First, you define a people as other. Then you explain why their presence is a problem next. You propose a humane solution finally. You act shocked when that solution becomes a death march. Even today we hear echoes. They're not sending their best. They don't share our values. They need to go back where they came from. The language of removal never really goes away. It just puts on new clothes. But here's something remarkable. That Supreme Court case, Worcester versus Georgia, the one Andrew Jackson ignored, it's still law. In 2020, the Supreme Court ruled in McGirt versus Oklahoma that huge portions of eastern Oklahoma remain Native American territory for purposes of criminal jurisdiction. The treaties, broken and blood-stained as they are, still have power. The law remembers even when people forget. In 1987, Congress officially apologized for the Trail of Tears. In 2009, President Obama signed a broader apology for centuries of mistreatment. Apologies are words. The dead remain dead. But the Cherokee have a concept, gadugi. It means working together for the good of all. It's how they survived the removal. It's how they built new lives in a strange land. It's how they remember, because memory is its own form of resistance. Remember that sacred fire they carried? Through frozen rivers and killing fields? Through the valley of death itself? Let me tell you what fire means to the Cherokee. In the beginning times, the stories say, there was no fire in the world. The thunder beings had it all, hoarding it in the sky. All the animals were cold and suffering, so Water Spider, tiny, overlooked Water Spider, wove a bowl on her back, climbed to the heavens, and stole a single coal. She brought fire to the world. The Cherokee carried that same fire, literally and metaphorically, on the Trail of Tears. Federal soldiers couldn't understand why starving people would waste energy keeping embers alive. They didn't understand they were watching something unconquerable. You can force a people to walk 1,000 miles. You can steal their land, kill their children, break every promise you ever made. But you cannot extinguish what burns in the human spirit. Let's do the math that Andrew Jackson never did. 4,000 dead on the Trail of Tears. But that's just the ones we counted. What about the babies never born? The knowledge never passed down? The stories that died with their tellers? Ethnographers estimate that before European contact there were 50 to 100 million people in the Americas. By 1900, that number had fallen to fewer than 5 million. This isn't ancient history. The last survivor of the Trail of Tears, Rebecca Nugan, died in 1932. There are people alive today who knew people who walked that trail. But here's what the numbers don't capture. Each of those deaths was a universe. A grandmother who knew which plants could heal fever. A storyteller who could recite the history of the world. A child who might have grown up to change everything. Genocide isn't just about bodies. It's about possibilities murdered in the cradle. Drive through Tahlequah, Oklahoma today, the Cherokee Nation capital, and you'll see something that would have amazed Andrew Jackson. The Cherokee Nation operates its own hospitals, schools, and courts. It has its own tax code, its own police force, its own environmental protection agency. The Cherokee language, which the U.S. government tried to eradicate, is taught in immersion schools. Children who are 7 generations removed from the Trail of Tears are learning the words their ancestors died to preserve. In 2019, the Cherokee Nation sent a delegate to Congress, honoring a promise made in that blood-soaked Treaty of New Echota. It only took 184 years, but don't mistake survival for healing. Intergenerational trauma doesn't disappear just because you build casinos and hospitals. The suicide rate among Native American youth is still 2.5 times the national average. The poverty rate is double. You can apologize for genocide. You can't undo it. Here's what haunts me about the Trail of Tears. Everyone involved thought they were the good guys. Andrew Jackson believed he was saving the Indians from extinction. The Georgia settlers thought they were fulfilling God's plan for American expansion. Even the soldiers read their letters home. Many were horrified by what they were doing, but they did it anyway. Orders are orders. Law is law. That's how atrocity works. Not with monsters, but with ordinary people following ordinary incentives. A farmer who needs land. A politician who needs votes. A soldier who needs his pension. Evil doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It comes dressed as necessity. The Cherokee have a prophecy about the end of the world. They say that one day, the world will be covered in a great web. Invisible strands connecting every person, every place, everything. And when this web is complete, the old world will end and a new one will begin. Some Cherokee elders say we're living in that prophecy now. The internet is the web. The old world, the world that made the Trail of Tears possible, is dying. But what kind of world will replace it? I've walked parts of the Trail of Tears. In some places, you can still see the ruts where wagon wheels cut into the earth. The land remembers. There's a Cherokee word, Digadatselei. It means where they cried, but it means more than that. It means a place where sorrow has soaked so deep into the earth that it becomes sacred. The entire trail is Digadatseli now. So what do we do with this knowledge? What do the dead demand of the living? Not guilt. Guilt is useless, a performance for our own benefit. Not even anger, though anger has its place. What they demand is memory. Real memory, the kind that changes how we see the present. Every American child learns about the Trail of Tears. It's a paragraph in a textbook, maybe two. A regrettable chapter in our otherwise glorious history. But what if we're wrong? What if the Trail of Tears isn't an exception to American history, but its most honest expression? What if every border, every property line, every deed is written in someone else's blood? The Cherokee rebuilt their nation after losing everything. They kept their language alive when speaking it was forbidden. They maintained their identity when the entire weight of American civilization was bent on crushing it. If they could do that, what excuse do we have? Today in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, the sacred fire still burns. The same fire they carried on the Trail of Tears. The same fire water spiders stole from the thunder beings at the beginning of time. It has never gone out, not through removal, not through allotment, not through termination policies or boarding schools or any of the 100 other ways America tried to solve its Indian problem. Fire is funny that way. The more you try to stamp it out, the more it spreads. Embers fly on the wind. They land in unexpected places. They wait for their moment, and then they rise. So I leave you with this. The Cherokee word for human being is Yivwi. But it means more than just human. It means the people who are real. After everything, after the removal, the death march, the centuries of broken promises, the Cherokee still call themselves the real people. Not the only people, not the chosen people, just real. In a world of artificial borders and manufactured hatreds, of digital lies and virtual lives, what does it mean to be real? What does it mean to be human? And if a democracy can do what America did to the Cherokee, if good people can stand by while their neighbors are marched to their deaths, if law itself can become lawlessness, then what are we? Maybe that's the real lesson of the Trail of Tears. Not just that America committed genocide. Lots of nations have done that, but that we did it while proclaiming liberty and justice for all. We did it with laws and treaties and administrative efficiency. We did it while believing ourselves civilized. The Cherokee survived our civilization. The question is, can we?